At Tully Lake, people witnessed strange blazing shapes in the night called hinotama.
And in dreaming, he had a vision of his deceased mother. She was holding a bowl of rice.
After death, Rosita journeyed to heaven and met God, who asked her where her children were.
For some people in this cultural milieu, an alien has more relevance than a ghost.
Reach beyond the darkness, beyond the grave, to an unexplored dimension as we travel to the mysterious realm of ghosts. Journey with us into the world of ghost stories. He heard a clanking noise deep down below, as if someone were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge recalled that ghosts in haunted houses were said to drag chains. Suddenly, the cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and the clanking noise grew louder. First on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards the bedroom. The old man tried to convince himself that these were nothing more than the sounds of an aged house settling. But then a ghastly phantom passed right through the heavy chamber door. In literature, the practice of creating ghosts to evoke a sense of terror in one's readers is as old as the art of storytelling itself. Throughout history, the device has been used so effectively that even the phrase ghost story conjures up images of horror and dread. But when did such tales begin? And where did this notion of spirits returning from the dead to terrify the living come from? There are those who believe that death is the end, but they are greatly outnumbered by others who, at least on some level, accept the existence of an afterlife. Whether it is a belief that one goes to heaven or hell, or that the soul is reincarnated in another life on earth, or that it becomes part of the collective consciousness, the element of the spirit world is there. And because it is accepted that souls or spirits can journey to other realms, logic follows that they must also be able to return. Where the belief regarding the wandering of the soul after death originated is impossible to tell. But one thing is certain. In all societies, from the most primitive to the most modern, the law of ghost and spirit is present. And over generations, these tales of the restless dead become part of a culture's very fabric. They're no longer simply ghost stories, they become legends. One such is the account of La Llorona, a doomed young Mexican woman. At night, she wanders along the banks of streams and rivers, crying for her missing children. In Spanish, La Llorona means the weeping woman, and she is perhaps the most widely known ghost in the Spanish Southwest. In life, her name was Rosita. She was a peasant girl who one day caught the eye of a handsome suitor. They fell in love, and over a period of years, she bore his children. The young man visited Rosita often, and their life together was wonderful in almost every way, except that their union was not blessed by the church. Moreover, the young man's parents were unaware of the arrangement. Had they been, they would have surely disapproved, because in their philosophy, a girl such as Rosita was not worthy of a son such as theirs. Time passed, and the man's parents arranged for him to be wed to the daughter of a wealthy landowner. Obliged to honor his parents' wishes, the young man sadly informed Rosita that he must marry another. But he promised to visit her and the children often. Enraged by the betrayal, Rosita drove her lover away. And on the day of his wedding, Rosita, crazed with grief, took their children to a river and drowned them and herself. After death, Rosita journeyed to heaven and met God, who asked her where her children were. Ashamed, the pitiful girl told him she didn't know. God explained that without them he could not allow her to enter paradise. Rosita had no choice but to return to Earth. To this day, Rosita, La Llorona, can be seen searching in vain alongside rivers and streams, weeping and crying for her innocent murdered children. There are three essential elements for a legend: a strong basic story appeal, a foundation in actual belief, and a meaningful message or moral. The story of La Llorona is an obedience legend. It is told as a true story of what might get you if you're out after dark. But the more frequent use of the story is aimed at teenage girls to warn them against becoming involved with men who might say all the right things, but who will never marry them.
Many, many ghost stories are directed at young people. It's part of the socialization process to hear these stories and to learn about what is proper behavior and what is not proper behavior from the stories.
The way a legend becomes legendary is not simply due to its subject matter. Such tales also gain longevity as a result of the manner in which a storyteller sets up his saga.
A typical American legend, in fact the classic automobile legend that has to do with ghosts, is called the vanishing hitchhiker. And almost everybody has heard this. Usually you hear it from a friend of a friend. You're telling the story and you say, a friend of my friend told me this, thus it has authenticity. Also, usually it is connected to a specific place, a specific road, maybe even a specific name. So the story always seems very authentic.
In the legend of the vanishing hitchhiker, the person seeking a ride is most often a young woman.
Hey, are you all right?
Yeah, I'm all right. Do you think I could get a ride?
Yeah, of course.
Sure, jump in the back.
It must be freezing.
Thanks. Here, you know what? Take my coat. Oh, thank you. Thanks.
As they ride along, the couple ask their hitchhiker where she's going. The woman tells them, and they agree to take her there. But when they arrive, the Good Samaritans realize something is terribly wrong.
Here we are.
The young woman has inexplicably vanished. Knowing the girl could not have possibly exited the car prior to their arrival, the baffled couple decide to ask the occupants of the house about their mysterious passenger. The owner turns out to be the young woman's father, who explains to the couple that 5 years ago his daughter Mary was returning from college for the Thanksgiving holiday when she was killed in a horrible car crash outside of town. Ever since the accident, when school is not in session, his determined young daughter attempts the long journey home. But sadly, his dutiful child never makes it that far. As the couple are about to leave, the man mentions that on their way back they'll pass right by the cemetery where his daughter is buried. The gentleman then thanks the man and woman for their kindness to Mary, and they go. Back on the road, curiosity gets the best of the couple, and they stop at the cemetery. Could the eerie story the man told them really be true? Did they, in fact, give a ride to a ghost? They find the answers to their questions quickly enough. They approach a grave and instantly recognize it as Mary's, because there, draped over a headstone with her name on it, is the coat that the young hitchhiking woman had borrowed. All those she tried to ask for assistance ran from her in terror. Not wanting to frighten the blind man as well, the ghost woman carefully approached him so that she might explain to him her plight. Like so many other legends, There are as many variations of the vanishing hitchhiker tale as there are numbers of people who tell it. And though there are countless versions, logically, the story had to begin elsewhere. How do such legends come into existence?
There are many, many legends about ghosts that become localized or regionalized. Sometimes they have to do with a real event. For example, when Susan Smith murdered her 2 little boys, she had them in the back of the car and she put the car into the lake and they died there. Recently, we've seen another carload of people died at the very same spot. Thus, legends are already beginning to be circulated about that place, that perhaps the spirits of the little boys are there and they're seeking to bring other people to their watery death with them. So sometimes we find otherworldly explanations from real events like that.
Another reason ghostly legends develop can be traced to the way the dead are regarded by certain cultures. In some societies, it is customary to honor those who have died by welcoming their spiritual presence. And to anger or dishonor one's ancestors is a sin for which one cannot be forgiven.
In Asian cultures, there is a sense of connection between the living and the dead, that it doesn't end when life ends. And there's a constant sense of having loved ones remain a part of the family and of doing honor to them even after they have gone, even to several generations past. So when you go to cemeteries, for instance, you will see offerings. You will also see personal shrines in people's homes, particularly among Buddhists. You will see photographs of deceased loved ones, perhaps with a bowl that chimes to call in the spirits, and also incense to burn. And people will often leave food offerings at these personal altars.
In many Asian communities, elaborate rituals and ceremonies are carried out upon the death of a loved one in order to appease the spirit of the deceased.
If a spirit is not pacified and happy and doesn't make the transition into the next realm peacefully, then that spirit, it's very similar actually to Western beliefs about ghosts, so that spirit will be doomed in a sense.
The tradition of ancestor veneration, or the ceremonial honoring of one's dead relatives, has its roots in Buddhism.
Moggallana was one of the disciples of Buddha, and one night he fell asleep, and in dreaming he had a vision of his deceased mother, and she was gaunt and her face was very sad, and she was holding a bowl of rice, and he saw her take some rice and lift it to her mouth, but as soon as it touched her lips it burst into flames. And then Moggallana woke, and he was very disturbed by seeing his mother this way. So he went to the Buddha to ask for advice, and the Buddha told him that in order to pacify his mother, who was now in the land of the hungry ghost, that he must go to the priests and have them conduct certain ceremonies and give certain offerings. And when he had done all of these things, he fell asleep again, and he saw another vision of his mother, and this time she had a full face. She was holding the full bowl of rice and was able to eat. And when Moggallana awoke from this dream, he began to dance, and it was a dance of joy.
In the traditional art and literature of Japan, ghosts, demons, and other spirit entities appear more than in any other culture. They are of diverse kinds, both good and evil. In the story of the tofu seller's first wife, the ghost could be considered good or it might be considered evil, depending upon where your sympathies lie. One day, the ghost of a grieving woman saw a blind man walking along a path. She needed someone to help her with a task, but because of her appearance, all those she tried to ask for assistance ran from her in terror. Not wanting to frighten the blind man as well, the ghost woman carefully approached him so that she might explain to him her plight. When she was alive, she told him she'd been the beautiful wife of a tofu seller. But then she died, and her husband remarried. The tofu seller's second wife was an evil woman and had a habit of terrorizing the first wife's child. The ghost woman had come back to set things right. But she was unable to enter the house where her husband and child lived because the second wife had placed a talisman on the doorway which kept ghosts and spirits out. the ghost woman needed the blind man's help to remove the charm. Having pity on her, the man agreed, and after he took the talisman down, the ghost woman entered the house with a strange smile on her face. She had barely gone inside when the blind man heard a terrible scream, and then silence. Later, it was determined that the second wife had been literally frightened to death. No one knew exactly how such a thing could have happened, except the blind man. The coexistence of ghosts and ancestor spirits among the living is an accepted part of everyday life in Japan. But at one time, in another country, thousands of miles away, ghosts were actually outlawed by a nervous government which feared an uprising from the underworld. Where could this unusual country be? We'll find out next.
And the idea of helpful spirits and familial spirits are certainly well defined within Native traditions. Yet the idea of a ghost is one of a corrupted personality, one that can be infectious, one that can cause sickness if one is nearby.
Bone-chilling accounts of goblins and ghouls out to destroy humankind have caused many to fear the things that go bump in the night. But what threat do ghosts really present? In the 19th century, the Native American ghost dance movement, based on the concept of summoning ancestor spirits to help restore a nation, was such a threat to some that it became the catalyst for one of the bloodiest battles in American history.
It's difficult to say anything general about American Indian cultures because there are thousands of them and they exist over two continents of the planet.
There are over 200 languages still utilized today and over 500 tribes throughout North America alone that have very similar yet very distinct spiritual and cultural value systems.
If there's anything that can be said in general, it probably is that ghosts, or the word ghost, has a negative connotation. Most Native people will not talk about ghosts, and you find little traditions that have anything positive to say about the entity that we refer to as a ghost. However, the word spirit has a different connotation. Everything has spirit in it. Nature is filled with spirit.
Spirits are around us at all times. The spirits of our ancestors we call upon for strength and acknowledgement. When one passes on, it's a continuum, if you will, of life that's already been experienced. One is going on to the next life and will carry on from those aspects.
And the idea of helpful spirits and familial spirits are certainly well defined within Native traditions. Yet the idea of a ghost is one of a corrupted personality, one that can be infectious, one that can cause sickness if one is nearby. There is a notable exception to the negative perception of ghosts by Native Americans, and that would be in the case of the 19th century ghost dance. That was a popular revitalization movement that took place on the plains. It actually began in the west, out on the edge of California, with a Paiute prophet named Wovoka, who promised to his followers that if they were to dance in the manner that he described and sing songs that he brought to them, that they would have a chance to see once again deceased relatives, to see the plains replenished with buffalo, and Native American sovereignty flourish once again on the continent.
Individuals would dance together, the whole tribe, and you'd see hundreds and up to thousands of people that would get in a circle, which was very significant, to call upon the ancestors. There are 7 directions of the circle, which is the traditional northeast, west, south, as well as up and down, and the most important direction is within. When we look within ourselves, and within ourselves, the spirits of our ancestors are always going to be there for us.
The ghost dance, as explained by Wovoka, was one where people gathered in circles holding hands and danced until they collapsed in reverie. They adorned themselves with shirts that had special markings on them that were recognizable to other practitioners and were referred to as ghost shirts. The popularity of the ghost dance was so complete on the plains that it frightened U.S. officials into thinking that it would create a revival of warrior traditions, and that Native people, being encouraged by the idea of the ghost dance, might stage another revolution and try to take back their country. So the ghost dance was literally outlawed by the United States government, and practitioners were persecuted by the U.S. Army. The worst example of this came at the Battle of Wounded Knee, which is considered to be the end of the American Indian sovereignty period in the United States. At Wounded Knee, a group of ghost dancers who were following a leader named Bigfoot were massacred by the 7th Cavalry, who were brought to the battlefield specifically to give them a chance to avenge Custer's massacre. And in a very bloody incident in American history, the ghost dance, the ghost dancers, the ghost shirts were all laid in red in the white snows.
We lost so many of our young, talented people due to those efforts of the U.S. government that we had a lot of spirits that left too early. But the spirits of our ancestors are always with us, and we're taught to respect and always acknowledge the spirits that have been before us, that have given their lives for the betterment of the people, for the tribe, for the group.
And then in the daytime like this, you see a smoke coming from a pot. It's a smoke in the afternoon. In the night, it is fire. No rain puts it off. It means it is protected. This property is protected by ghosts and spirits.
One of the world's most unusual ghost legends originates in West Africa. It seems that when it comes to home security, burglar alarms and watchdogs are no match for the spirit sentinels of Nigeria.
In the African cosmos, there is a belief in ghosts because Africans actually believe that life is a continuum. There's a strong link between the past, the present, and the future, which we call the living dead, the living and the unborn, and they interplay.
And like other countries, Nigeria has its share of ghost lore.
Stories about ghosts, about either ghosts of departed ancestors who come to watch over and protect the living, their loved ones, their property, and sometimes their farms.
But deceased ancestors don't always return to watch over their families. And when they do fail to appear, people find other ways to attract spirit protectors.
There's the tradition of people buying the services of ghosts and spirits to look after the property. And people go to the priests of the shrine to pay some money, and then they buy the powers of the spirits or their services and to look after their property in the farm. I've seen that myself.
Along with money, other items are required, including a clay pot and the dried fruit bunch of a palm tree. When the elements are prepared, the clay vessel is placed on the property to be protected.
And then in the daytime like this, you see a smoke coming from a pot. It's a smoke in the afternoon. In the night, it is fire. The smoke is always there every day. Whether it rains or shines, the smoke is there. The fire is there, whether it rains or shines, no rain puts it off. It means it is protected. This property is protected by ghosts and spirits. You don't, no thief, no burglar, whatever can interfere in those areas. You see, it's like beware of dogs, or beware of, or this property is protected by this security system. So when you see it, you know that that is what it means. That property is private property, don't interfere. It is protected by ghosts and spirits.
Francis Arwe is a Nigerian performer and storyteller. He and his group, the Nigerian Talking Drum Ensemble, relate their cultural legends in music, song, and dance.
The most important part of African music, or dance, or storytelling, or singing, is the messages they have for their community.
Frequently, these messages are about the lessons of raising children.
To us, the children are not just something you want to have for the sake of having them. They are our future investment. So they are our power. That is why any African will spend his entire or her entire time or whatever he or she has to make sure you raise your child well.
In a story called The Feast, a lesson of listening is taught. The tale begins with a woman, a powerful and very spiritual woman.
She also had one son, a very, very strong son. His name was Aleju. The two of them loved and respected each other. And their love and their respect also extended to the entire community.
But sadly, the man's mother passed away, though she did not leave her son forever.
So one day, the mother came in a vision to Aleju. I say, Aleju, there was coming an invitation from big people to a big feast. Do not refuse to take the invitation, but when you get there, don't sit down anywhere and do not eat any food. Don't be afraid, because you're not alone. The mother also told him to go with his dog and a bone.
Just as the mother had predicted, the invitation came and Aleju gathered his friends and started out. He also took his dog and a bone.
As they stepped out of the house, the mother came, the ghost of the mother appeared.
Aleju did not recognize his mother's ghost, so she began to sing to him.
And in the song, he had his name, Aleju. He also had the one given to him by the mother. And he could eventually recognize that was the voice of his mom.
With his mother's advice in mind, Aleju continued on and soon arrived at his destination. It was an incredible palace. Aleju couldn't imagine how any harm could come to him in such a fine home.
The whole place was decorated with gold and silver. But he remembered the one given to him in the vision. So it brought out that bone and he threw the bone to the very seat prepared for him. So as soon as he threw the bone, the dog followed. And as soon as the dog stepped on the mat, whip, fell into a very big and deep hole.
The hole under the mat was intended for Aleju.
But because he followed the instruction and he was careful, he did not see. And that is what saved him. Because he listened to the mother, followed the instruction, he was saved from that death.
The concerned soul of Aleju's mother came back as a gentle spirit of song. But in our next ghost legend, the returning entity comes back as a markedly different creature. We've all heard of haunted houses. Well, coming up, we'll explore the legend of one unique phantom who prefers to take up residence not in people's homes, but in their very bodies.
And she had a domovoi that was taking care of the house, and every night before she would go to bed, he would brush out her hair and he would braid it. And he warned her never to unbraid his handiwork. He said, if you ever undo the braid that I've made, I'm gonna kill you.
The ghosts of legend have countless reasons for returning from the other side. Some are here to set right an error or to finish a task. Others come back to reveal hidden treasure or to point out a murderer. For the most part, these ghosts work as solo acts, so to speak. But there are stories of other kinds of spirits who seem to function as part of a team.
One such is a story based in Jewish tradition that started to be bandied about somewhere around the 16th century, and it's called the Dybbuk. And a Dybbuk isn't a classic ghost. There are Jewish ghost stories where there's some kind of spirit that comes, but there aren't very many stories like that. Usually there are stories about this creature called a Dybbuk. And a Dybbuk is only recognized once it possesses someone or enters someone's body. So a Dybbuk isn't really the same as a normal ghost. It's not acting on its own, it needs someone's body. The basic story of a Dybbuk is this, that a Dybbuk is it was probably a Jewish person who did something not so good near the end of his or her life. And so when this person died, the person was not allowed to go to Gehenna, or the afterlife. Instead, they were hounded, usually by angels, and chased all over the place, and they weren't given any rest. Well, the only rest that the Dybbuk could find is in another person's body, or sometimes an animal's body. For example, a Dybbuk, there's a story about a Dybbuk making its way into a fish. It went into the fish because it was safe there from the angels who were trying to beat him. So he was in this fish, and then the fish was caught and taken to market, and a woman came to the market and bought the fish and brought it home. The woman had probably done something wrong. The Dybbuk usually would possess someone because the person had broken a taboo, like not believing in God, or a woman was sweeping the house on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, when she's not supposed to do any work, or she took the Lord's name in vain, something like that.
Having broken such a taboo, the unsuspecting woman prepared a meal with the possessed fish.
And she ate the fish, and the Dybbuk thus entered the woman, and the woman was possessed by this Dybbuk and began speaking with the man's voice, speaking with the Dybbuk's voice, and then the Dybbuk then had to be exorcised by a rabbi.
Exorcism rites involved calling upon God to remove the intruder and smoking the Dybbuk out.
They would have some kind of incense or some kind of substance. The possessed person would be inhaling this smoke, and the Dybbuk would presumably not like it, not like the smell, not like the exhortations the rabbis were bringing upon the Dybbuk, and would therefore seek to leave the body because it wasn't so comfortable there anymore.
The possessing entity could be drawn out through only 2 points on the body.
And the Dybbuk, for some reason, had to be gotten out by the little finger or by a toe. This is the way it would exit.
And once the exorcism was complete, a tiny drop of blood would appear at the exit site, which was the evidence that the Dybbuk had departed.
Sometimes there are historical accounts of such exorcisms of Dybbuks where, usually the person would die during such an exorcism, so you didn't want to get possessed.
The story of the Dybbuk is another obedience legend.
You can see in this type of story, certainly there's discussion about prohibition and taboos, and it carries a very valuable lesson to people in the community that they need to follow the rules, follow the laws. Otherwise, an evil spirit can enter into you.
In Russia, there exists the legend of a spirit who can be in one moment a benevolent protector and in the next a murdering fiend. This two-faced phantom is known as a domovoi.
The domovoi spirit probably dates back to before the 12th century. It comes from the word dom, which means house. So it's directly linked to the house. The word domovoi itself means of the house. Sometimes he'll be in the form of an ancestor spirit, like a grandfather. Other times he'll just be a generic kind of old man, a short, small old man with unkempt clothing. A lot of times, however, he'll also appear as a pet, a dog or a cat. He's not a ghost in the sense that we think of ghosts. I think there's a little bit of a confusion sometimes, especially in modern scholarship, as to what exactly he is. Most people do agree that he is some sort of remnant of ancestor worship.
And like the honored dead in other cultures, a domovoi who is treated well is said to bring harmony to Russian households.
Basically, he tries to look out for the family that he lives with, unless they do something to anger him. If they've made him angry, he's liable to do a lot of mischievous and sometimes pretty negative kind of thing. The domovoi touching you at night is a sign of something that's going to happen. And it depends on the kind of touch that it is. If the touch is warm and soft and furry, it's a sign of really good luck. It means that something good's going to happen. The harvest is going to go well. Good luck is going to be brought to that family. However, a cold, clammy kind of touch from the domovoi indicates a very bad sign.
The domovoi is arguably one of the most ill-tempered spirits in all of ghost lore.
There's a story of a woman who she'd never been married. She was living by herself, and she had a domovoi that was taking care of the house, and every night before she would go to bed, he would brush out her hair and he would braid it. And he warned her never to unbraid his handiwork. He said, if you ever undo the braid that I've made, I'm going to kill you. Well, it so happened that she was going to get married. She finally was going to get married, and he was probably not very pleased about this.
A few days before the wedding, the woman decided to try on her wedding gown. She thought she might look prettier with her hair down, so without thinking, she undid the domovoi's braid. Some hours later, the woman's niece came to visit, but could not find her aunt anywhere. Then the young girl entered her aunt's bedroom. Lying on the bed, the woman was still dressed in her wedding gown. Her hair was beautifully braided. She seemed to be sleeping. But when the young girl looked closer, she realized the woman's beautiful braid was tightly twisted around her neck. As punishment for ignoring his warning, the domovoi had strangled the woman to death.
That's the kind of things that the domovoi might do. He'll sometimes kill people when they've displeased him, and usually it's by strangulation.
Needless to say, such a spirit is not the kind one wants to push to anger. Join us in a moment for more ghost stories as we investigate the ways ghosts and other entities from the beyond manage to manifest themselves here on Earth.
Someone's lying in their room at night and they hear or see a ghost come into the room and they know it's dead such and such person. I've heard this story from a couple of friends where it's the same type of thing. They're lying in their bed at night and someone comes in and they explain it as not a ghost but as an alien.
Thus far, we've examined how ghost legends become integrated within a culture. We've learned how at one time some spirits were called upon to help reclaim a lost nation. And we've seen the heinous aftermath of other more restless spirits. But now, let's look at the most important aspect of the ghost stories we've explored. Why are people so prone to believe them?
Sometimes people believe in ghosts or believe in anything based on a real experience. They've seen something, they've heard something, they saw something, and they connect it to ghosts. For example, I remember my mother telling me that she saw a shadow near me when I was a baby, coming near me in the crib. She explains this, and she believes it to be my grandfather, who had died some months prior to my birth, coming to bless me or to visit me or to see me for the first time. So one of the ways to explain belief in ghosts, we don't know what it really was. It could have been anything, but in our culture, ghosts and talk of ghosts is very normal. It's sort of in our cultural unconscious that some unexplained phenomena might be a ghost instead of the whistling wind.
The environment in which a person lives may also give rise to a belief in otherworldly beings.
Ghost stories do change over the years, over the centuries, even over the days. Usually, such variations occur based on what's happening in the culture and the climate, the political situation or the social situation, or the situation of the storyteller. Let me explain. A classic ghost story that I've heard about will be someone's lying in their room at night and they hear or see a ghost come into the room and they know it's dead such and such person. I've heard this story from a couple of friends where it's the same type of thing. They're lying in their bed at night and someone comes in and they explain it as not a ghost but as an alien. So, you know, for some people in this cultural milieu, an alien has more relevance than a ghost.
And still another hypothesis suggests that ghosts, which cause fear, may be a product of the emotion of fear itself.
There are different theories about that, and there's actually been a study that was done among Japanese Americans when they were held in the concentration camps during World War II, particularly in Tully Lake, California. And what they found was that during this time of tribulation, when people were taken away from their homes, torn away from everything that was familiar to them, there were lots more instances of supernatural stories being told.
At Tully Lake, people witnessed strange blazing shapes in the night called hinotama.
They're often attributed as ghostly spirits, and they are described as just fireballs. They appear in the night, often in cemeteries, but also you get these reports of them in Tully Lake, above latrines, in the oddest of places, glowing balls that are attributed as ghosts. And the theory is that this is a manifestation of people's fears and internal strife during times of trouble. Being torn away from your home and being thrown into a concentration camp is, in a way, as inexplicable as a ghost appearing in your backyard. So if you have a story that's being told about a ghost doing something bad, does it have to do with anything else that's going on? In times of stress, again like this, if you are feeling anything that is disturbing you, whether it's personal or societal, that could manifest itself in a supernatural belief. Which is not to say, mind you, that it didn't actually happen, but maybe you just notice them more when you're afraid of other things.
Ghost Stories will be back in a moment. So, are the ghosts of legend really ghosts? Or are they just the imaginings of the mind? Or possibly aliens? Or simply our fears turned inside out? Ask someone who's been terrified by one of these unnerving specters. It's certain they'll give you an opinion of what they believe ghosts are. And who knows? If you find their story fascinating enough, you might be inspired to share it with a friend and start a ghost legend of your own. Thank you for joining us. I'm Patrick McNee. Good night. And where did this notion of spirits returning from the dead to terrify the living come from? There are those who believe that death is the end. But they are greatly outnumbered by others who, at least on some level, accept the existence of an afterlife. Whether it is a belief that one goes to heaven or hell, or that the soul is reincarnated in another life on earth, or that it becomes part of the collective consciousness, the element of the spirit world is there. And because it is accepted that souls or spirits can journey to other realms, logic follows that they must also be able to return. Where the belief regarding the wandering of the soul after death originated is impossible to tell. But one thing is certain. In all societies, from the most primitive to the most modern, the law of ghost and spirit is present. And over generations, these tales of the restless dead become part of a culture's very fabric. They're no longer simply ghost stories, they become legends. One such is the account of La Llorona, a doomed young Mexican woman. At night, she wanders along the banks of streams and rivers, crying for her missing children. In Spanish, La Llorona means the weeping woman, and she is perhaps the most widely known ghost in the Spanish Southwest. In life, her name was Rosita. She was a peasant girl who one day caught the eye of a handsome suitor. They fell in love, and over a period of years, she bore his children. The young man visited Rosita often, and their life together was wonderful in almost every way, except that their union was not blessed by the church. Moreover, the young man's parents were unaware of the arrangement. Had they been, they would have surely disapproved, because in their philosophy, a girl such as Rosita was not worthy of a son such as theirs. Time passed, and the man's parents arranged for him to be wed to the daughter of a wealthy landowner. Obliged to honor his parents' wishes, At Tully Lake, people witnessed strange blazing shapes in the night, called hinotama.
And in dreaming, he had a vision of his deceased mother. She was holding a bowl of rice.
After death, Rosita journeyed to heaven and met God, who asked her where her children were.
For some people in this cultural milieu, an alien has more relevance than a ghost.
Reach beyond the darkness, beyond the grave, to an unexplored dimension as we travel to the mysterious realm of ghosts. Journey with us into the world of ghost stories. He heard a clanking noise deep down below, as if someone were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge recalled that ghosts in haunted houses were said to drag chains. Suddenly, the cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and the clanking noise grew louder. First on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards the bedroom. The old man tried to convince himself that these were nothing more than the sounds of an aged house settling. But then a ghastly phantom passed right through the heavy chamber door. In literature, the practice of creating ghosts to evoke a sense of terror in one's readers is as old as the art of storytelling itself. Throughout history, the device has been used so effectively that even the phrase ghost story conjures up images of horror and dread. But when did such tales begin? The young man sadly informed Rosita that he must marry another, but he promised to visit her and the children often. Enraged by the betrayal, Rosita drove her lover away. And on the day of his wedding, Rosita, crazed with grief, took their children to a river and drowned them and herself. After death, Rosita journeyed to heaven and met God, who asked her where her children were. Ashamed, the pitiful girl told him she didn't know. God explained that without them, he could not allow her to enter paradise. Rosita had no choice but to return to Earth. To this day, Rosita, La Llorona, can be seen searching in vain alongside rivers and streams, weeping and crying for her innocent murdered children. There are three essential elements for a legend: a strong basic story appeal, a foundation in actual belief, and a meaningful message or moral. The story of La Llorona